I don't think it's unreasonable to expect a Christian preacher to preach the gospel in every sermon. And I think it's something that we should expect from the pastors. I would just think fundamentally we would assume that pastors are preaching the Bible, so they're in a text, and Jesus has taught us that all of the scripture points to him, like Luke chapter 24 would tell us. So there's a way to get to Christ and a way to get to the gospel in every single sermon. So pastors, if they're going to be faithful to God and serve God in the ministry of the word, need to preach the gospel because the Bible points to Christ if we're preaching the scriptures. But I think also we should be preaching Christ in every sermon because there could be unbelievers there, and very likely are going to be unbelievers there. So if we're going to best serve them in their context, what's the number one thing they need to know? They don't need to know fundamentally how a Christian should live. They need to know what makes somebody a Christian. What do I have to believe in order to be a Christian? So preaching the gospel would best serve the unbelievers that were there. But then also the believers that are there. Like Paul begins the letter to the Romans that he is eager to go and bring the gospel to them, right? He wants to. He's in bondage to preach the gospel to those who are in Rome. He wants to encourage the Christians that are there. So both Christians and non-Christians, we need to hear the gospel. We forget the gospel. We need to be reminded of that truth. So if we leave off the gospel and we just preach the moral imperatives of the New Testament or the Old Testament, then we're really going to reduce the message of our sermons down to moralism, and they're just going to be kind of self-help talks that leave off the supernatural power. We would leave off the motivation for all Christian living. We'd leave off the means for the power for Christian living. And we'd leave off the model, Christ himself, for Christian living. So all of those things are bound up in what we're trying to do with the sermon. We want to glorify God by preaching the word faithfully. We want to see the lost called to him. We need the gospel to be preached. And we want the people of God to be built up in the gospel of God so that they can live in light of it. So I think if you're going to preach a sermon aiming at those things, then you want to glorify God and serve God's people, you need to preach the gospel in every sermon.